Delegates from 100 species filled the semicircular tiers, their murmurs resonating in the chamber like a restless tide. At the center, High Chancellor Varric stood, his imposing figure framed by the holographic projections of interstellar maps. His silver robe shimmered under the ambient light, but his expression was grim, his voice steady and measured as he addressed the assembly. "King Jorth of the Yeltrax Empire," Varric began, his deep voice commanding silence. All eyes turned toward the alien king seated defiantly in the guest chair, his reptilian features twisted into a smirk. Jorth's crimson scales gleamed under the chamber's luminescence, and his piercing yellow eyes flicked between the delegates with an air of disdain. "We convene this emergency session to discuss your actions on the fringes of Terran space," Varric continued. "Your forces have encroached upon human colonies, violating the non-aggression pact ratified by this very council. I remind you that humanity's history is not one of submission. They are a species both resilient and dangerous." Jorth leaned back, resting his clawed hands on the ornate armrests of his throne-like chair. "Dangerous? Resilient?" he mocked, his voice a guttural growl. "They are insects with toys they barely comprehend. My fleets will sweep them aside as one would brush dust from a mantle." There was a murmur of unease among the delegates. Jorth's arrogance was infamous, but his dismissal of humanity was particularly reckless. The Terrans were still relatively new to interstellar politics, yet they had a reputation for unpredictability that made even seasoned powers wary. Chancellor Varric's gaze hardened. "You misunderstand, King Jorth. Humanity's strength lies not in numbers or advanced technology, though they are far from defenseless. It lies in their adaptability, their capacity for unity under threat, and their unparalleled ruthlessness when provoked." Jorth scoffed, his sharp teeth bared in a sneer. "Spare me your melodrama, Chancellor. My empire has crushed civilizations far older and more formidable than these Terrans. Why should I fear them?" A delegate from the Arcani species, a willowy creature with translucent skin that pulsed faintly with light, rose from his seat. "Perhaps," the Arcani said, his voice melodic but firm, "you should recall the fate of the Orvalis Dominion. They underestimated humanity, and now their empire exists only in archival records." Jorth's smirk faltered, but he quickly masked it with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The Orvalis were fools, undone by their hubris. I am no such fool." "You are more like them than you think," Varric interjected, his tone sharp. "I was there when the Terrans retaliated against the Orvalis. Their vengeance was swift, their strategies brutal. Entire fleets vanished, their homeworld reduced to ash. And all because the Orvalis dared to enslave a single human colony." Jorth leaned forward, his claws digging into the armrests. "Enough of this fear-mongering. Humanity is a minor annoyance, a pest to be exterminated. My fleets are already in motion. Their colonies will burn, and their species will kneel before the Yeltrax." Varric shook his head, his expression one of weary resignation. "You've been warned, Jorth. The Council's purpose is to maintain peace, but we will not shield you from the consequences of your actions. When humanity responds, and they will respond, your empire will face a reckoning unlike any you have ever known." Jorth rose abruptly, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the chamber. "This council grows soft, cowering before a species unworthy of its attention. I do not need your approval or your warnings. The Yeltrax Empire answers to no one." With that, he stormed out of the chamber, his retinue of armored guards trailing behind him. The room fell into a heavy silence, the tension palpable. Many delegates exchanged uneasy glances, their thoughts mirroring the grim reality Varric had laid bare. After a moment, the representative from the Zathri Collective, a species of crystalline entities known for their strategic acumen, spoke. "He will not listen. The Yeltrax are too blinded by their own arrogance." Varric nodded, his gaze distant as he watched Jorth's departure. "And that arrogance will be their undoing. I have seen what happens when humans are pushed too far. They do not simply defeat their enemies. They destroy them, utterly and without mercy. King Jorith believes himself invincible. He does not realize he is courting extinction. The Arkeni delegate tilted his head, his luminous body dimming slightly. Is there nothing we can do to prevent this war? Varric sighed. Diplomacy has its limits. The Council cannot compel the Yeltrax to halt their aggression, and humanity will not stand idle while their people are slaughtered. The path Jorith has chosen leads only to bloodshed. The chamber remained silent as Varric's words hung in the air. The delegates knew the High Chancellor spoke the truth. Humanity had proven time and again that they were a force to be reckoned with, capable of both great compassion and terrifying wrath. And now, the Yeltrax Empire had set itself on a collision course with that wrath. As the session adjourned, Varric lingered in the chamber, staring out at the stars beyond the transparent walls. He had tried to warn Jorith, to steer him away from the path of destruction, but the king's hubris was unyielding, and the warning had fallen on deaf ears. "May the stars have mercy on us all," Varric murmured, his voice barely audible. For he knew that when humanity's fury was unleashed, mercy would be the last thing the Yeltrax Empire could expect. The stage was set, and the galaxy watched with bated breath as the inevitable storm began to gather. The quiet hum of Earth's orbital command center was shattered by the sudden blare of alarms. General Marcus Kane, a broad-shouldered figure with streaks of gray in his close-cropped hair, strode into the operations room, his sharp blue eyes scanning the array of holographic displays. A swarm of red indicators flickered ominously across the galactic map, marking an incursion near the outer colonies. Kane's jaw tightened as he recognized the coordinates. "Report," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. A young lieutenant snapped to attention, his face pale. "Sir, Yeltrax forces have attacked Outpost Echo 12. Initial reports indicate heavy civilian casualties. They didn't just target the colony, General. They bombarded it into oblivion." The room fell silent. Kane's hands curled into fists at his sides. Echo 12 wasn't just a remote outpost. It was home to nearly 50,000 settlers, families who had carved out a life on the edge of human space. Now, it was gone, wiped from existence by the Yeltrax Empire's unprovoked aggression. "Survivors?" Kane asked, though he already suspected the answer. The lieutenant shook his head. "None, sir. The colony's distress signal cut out before reinforcements could arrive. The Yeltrax left no one alive." A low murmur rippled through the room, a mix of anger and disbelief. Humanity had faced threats before, but this was different. This wasn't war. It was extermination. Kane turned to Colonel Ethan Briggs, his second-in-command and a man he trusted implicitly. Briggs was lean and wiry, his weathered face betraying years of battlefield experience. His dark eyes met Kane's with a smoldering intensity. "Ethan, assemble the Joint Defense Command," Kane said, his voice steady but charged with barely suppressed fury. "I want every fleet on high alert and all military assets mobilized. We're not waiting for the Yeltrax to strike again." Briggs nodded. "Understood, sir. But what about the Galactic Council? They'll demand restraint." Kane's expression hardened. The Council's warnings didn't stop this massacre. Diplomacy has failed. If they want to lecture us about restraint, they can do it after we've ensured the Yeltrax can never do this again. Briggs gave a grim smile. "It's about time someone reminded the galaxy what happens when you push us too far." As Briggs moved to carry out his orders, Kane turned his attention back to the map. His thoughts were a tempest of rage and sorrow. He could still picture the faces of the settlers he had met on Echo 12 during his last inspection tour. Hard-working men and women who had believed in humanity's future among the stars. Now, their dreams had been snuffed out, their lives reduced to nothing more than an entry in a casualty report. The comms officer interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, we've intercepted a transmission from the Yeltrax flagship. It's a live broadcast." "Put it through," Kane said, his voice like steel. The holographic display shifted, revealing the towering figure of King Jorith. His crimson scales gleamed under the harsh light of his throne room, and his predatory smile was one of triumph. Behind him, the tattered remains of a Terran colony flag hung like a trophy. "Humans," Jorth began, his guttural voice filled with mockery, "your weakness has been laid bare. Outpost Echo 12 was but the first. Your defiance is futile, your species insignificant. Surrender now, and perhaps I will spare what remains of your pathetic civilization." Kane's eyes burned with fury, but he forced himself to remain calm. He gestured for the transmission to be muted, then addressed the room. "Record this message," he ordered. "Every word, every frame. I want the entire planet to see exactly who we're dealing with." The comms officer nodded, quickly capturing the broadcast. Jorth's words would not cow humanity. They would ignite it. Kane knew his people, knew their resilience and their capacity for vengeance. This atrocity would not break them. It would galvanize them. The transmission ended with Jorth's mocking laughter, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Kane exhaled slowly, his mind already racing with the steps ahead. "Send a priority message to President Harper," he said. "Inform him that we're moving to full wartime readiness. The Yeltraks have made their intentions clear, and it's time we respond in kind." "Yes, sir," the comms officer replied, his voice steady despite the tension. Kane turned to Briggs, who had returned with updates. "Ethan, I want strike teams deployed to the outer colonies immediately. We'll defend what we can while we prepare for a counteroffensive. And when we strike back," Briggs asked. Kane's expression was grim, his voice cold and resolute. "When we strike back, we make it clear to the Yeltraks and the rest of the galaxy that humanity will not be provoked without consequence." Briggs nodded, a fierce determination in his eyes. "Understood, sir. We'll make them regret ever setting foot in our space." The two men exchanged a brief but meaningful look, a shared understanding of the weight of the task ahead. They had both seen the horrors of war, but they had also witnessed humanity's unyielding spirit in the face of adversity. This fight would be no different. As the command center buzzed with activity, Kane allowed himself a moment to reflect. The Yeltraks had made a grave miscalculation. They had mistaken humanity's patience for weakness, their desire for peace as a lack of resolve. But now, with the ashes of Echo 12 still smoldering, that illusion had been shattered. Humanity had been provoked, and there would be no going back. Kane's gaze hardened as he stared at the galactic map, his mind already envisioning the battles to come. The Yeltraks thought they had seen humanity's limits, but they had yet to face the full measure of their fury. They wanted a war, he muttered under his breath. "We'll give them one." The deep black of space roared with light as humanity's retaliation began. Admiral Victor Peterson stood on the bridge of Solar Wrath, humanity's flagship, a vessel forged not just for defense but for devastation. Its sleek, obsidian hull bristled with railguns, missile batteries, and plasma cannons, all now primed for war. Around it, the Terran fleet emerged from subspace, a storm of ships spilling into Yeltraks-controlled territory with calculated precision. Peterson's icy gray eyes swept across the holographic map before him, the positions of Yeltrak's strongholds flickering in red. "Initiate Operation Vengeance," he commanded, his voice calm and deliberate. "Targets are locked. All ships, fire at will." The order rippled through the fleet, and the vacuum of space erupted in a symphony of destruction. Missiles streaked toward their marks, leaving blazing trails in their wake. Railguns launched projectiles at near-light speed, shredding enemy vessels before their shields could respond. From the Solar Wrath, a barrage of plasma fire cut through the darkness, incinerating anything in its path. The Yeltraks fleet scrambled to respond, their golden-armored ships pivoting to face the unexpected assault. But they had underestimated humanity's resolve. The Terran fleet moved with ruthless efficiency, their formation precise, their strategy unyielding. Every Yeltrak's countermeasure was anticipated, every maneuver met with brutal force. On the bridge, Peterson observed the carnage with a cold detachment. He had no taste for unnecessary violence. But this wasn't just a military campaign, it was justice. The Yeltrax had made their choice when they annihilated Echo 12. Now, humanity would ensure they paid for every life lost. Admiral, Commander Elias Grant said, stepping forward. The younger officer's voice carried a mix of awe and urgency. Enemy reinforcements detected on the outer rim of the system. 3 cruisers and a dreadnought. Peterson didn't hesitate. Redirect the Vanguard and Ironclad to intercept. Deploy fighter squadrons to harry their approach. We'll keep them off balance. Grant saluted, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. Peterson's reputation as a strategist was well-earned, and today he was proving why. As Grant relayed the orders, Peterson turned his attention back to the main display. The Yeltrax dreadnought loomed large on the screen, its gargantuan form bristling with weaponry. It was a symbol of their empire's might, a fortress in space meant to inspire fear. But Peterson felt no fear, only determination. Focus fire on the dreadnought, he ordered. Let's see how mighty their flagship is when it's under sustained assault. The solar raft led the charge, its cannons unleashing a relentless barrage. Smaller Terran ships darted around the behemoth, exploiting its sluggish movements and targeting its weak points. Explosions rippled across its surface, the golden plating buckling under the onslaught. "Sir, their shields are failing," a tactical officer reported. "Good," Peterson said, his tone as sharp as a blade. "Keep up the pressure. We're not stopping until that ship is dust." Across the battlefield, humanity's fury was on full display. Infantry units launched surgical strikes on Yeltrax orbital stations, their exosuits and advanced weaponry giving them a decisive edge. On the surface of a key Yeltrax colony, Terran ground forces overwhelmed the defenders, their battle cries echoing in the alien air. Captain Ryan Holt led one such assault, his squad cutting through enemy lines with ruthless efficiency. Holt's face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but his focus never wavered. His rifle barked with precision as he advanced, each shot finding its mark. Around him, his men moved like a well-oiled machine, covering one another as they pushed forward. "Keep moving," Holt barked, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "We take this command center, and the Yeltrax lose control of the entire sector." The squad pressed on, their determination unwavering. They knew what was at stake, not just for themselves, but for humanity as a whole. Every step they took was a step closer to avenging the lives lost at Echo 12. Back in space, the battle reached a fever pitch. The Yeltrax dreadnought, battered and burning, launched a desperate counterattack. Its main cannon fired a massive energy beam, slicing through 2 Terran frigates. Peterson clenched his jaw at the loss but refused to waver. "Target their main cannon," he commanded. "We'll take away their teeth." The solar raft and its allies concentrated their fire, the combined assault overwhelming the dreadnought's defenses. A final barrage struck its core, triggering a catastrophic explosion that tore the ship apart. Cheers erupted across the Terran fleet, but Peterson remained stoic. "This is just the beginning," he reminded his crew. "We have a long way to go before this war is won." As the remnants of the Yeltrax fleet retreated, Peterson allowed himself a moment to reflect. Humanity had delivered a decisive blow, but he knew the Yeltrax wouldn't take this defeat lightly. They would regroup, and the next battle would be even fiercer. But Peterson was ready. He had seen what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink, and he had no doubt they would rise to the challenge. "Admiral," Grant said, his voice breaking the silence, "we received a transmission from President Harper. He commends our efforts and authorizes us to proceed with Phase 2. Peterson nodded. "Then we move forward. Inform the fleet. No rest, no hesitation. We hit their supply lines next, and we don't stop until the Yeltrax empire is brought to its knees." "Yes, sir," Grant replied, a fierce determination in his eyes. As the fleet prepared to jump to their next target, Peterson gazed out the viewport, the vast expanse of space stretching before him. He knew the cost of war, knew the sacrifices that lay ahead, but he also knew that humanity had been provoked in the worst possible way, and there could be no turning back. The Yell tracks had sought to break them, to reduce them to fear and submission. Instead, they had ignited a fire that would consume everything in its path until justice was served. Peterson's lips curled into a grim smile as he considered the battles to come. "Let them come," he muttered. "We'll show them what it means to provoke humanity." The Yell track's homeworld, Altair Prime, loomed on the horizon, a jewel of golden spires and shimmering blue oceans encased within a thick atmosphere. Once a symbol of an empire that spanned the stars, it was now the final bastion of a civilization brought to its knees. The Terran fleet, numbering in the thousands, encircled the planet like a steel vice, their weapons primed and ready. Admiral Victor Peterson stood at the helm of the Solar Wrath, his gaze fixed on the projection of Altair Prime displayed before him. Despite the scale of the operation, the bridge was silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Peterson's officers, seasoned veterans all, awaited his command with quiet intensity. "Admiral, our forces are in position," Commander Elias Grant reported. His voice held none of the nervousness one might expect before a planetary siege. "Orbital defenses are disabled. Ground forces report minimal resistance in the outer colonies. Altair Prime is defenseless." Peterson nodded, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. "Begin the operation. All units, proceed as planned." Across the fleet, his orders were relayed, and humanity's wrath descended on the Yell track stronghold. The first wave was swift and merciless, targeting key infrastructure and military installations with surgical precision. Orbital bombardments reduced their most formidable fortresses to molten craters, the once proud symbols of Yell track's dominance, crumbling under the unrelenting assault. On the ground, Captain Ryan Holt led the vanguard. His squad, hardened by months of brutal combat, pushed through the ruins of the capital city with grim determination. Holt's armor, scarred and battered, reflected the dim light of fires raging in the distance. He moved with purpose, his rifle steady as he advanced through the rubble-strewn streets. "Eyes up," he said, his voice sharp over the comms. "They're desperate now. Desperate enemies do stupid things." "Copy that," replied Sergeant Mason, one of his most trusted men. "But desperate or not, they've got nothing left to stop us." The squad moved with lethal efficiency, clearing each building they passed. Resistance was scattered and uncoordinated. The Yell track soldiers, once known for their arrogance, had lost the will to fight. Many surrendered on sight, their weapons discarded, their golden armor tarnished by defeat. But there were still pockets of defiance, fanatics who refused to yield even as their world crumbled around them. Holder's squad encountered one such group in a ruined plaza, a mix of soldiers and civilians huddled behind makeshift barricades. They fired wildly, their desperation evident in their erratic aim. Holt's men took cover, returning fire with calculated precision. "Flank them," Holt ordered. "Keep them pinned down. We don't waste time here." The maneuver was swift and decisive. Within minutes, the resistance was neutralized. As the dust settled, Holt scanned the battlefield, his jaw tightening at the sight of the fallen. He had no pity for the Yell track soldiers. They had brought this upon themselves, but the civilians caught in the crossfire stirred something in him. War spared no one, and humanity's vengeance had left no room for mercy. "Move out," Holt said, his voice hardened once more. "We've got a palace to reach." Back in orbit, the Terran fleet maintained its stranglehold on the planet. The Solar Wrath unleashed a final barrage, targeting the Yell track's high command's bunker buried deep beneath the capital. Advanced seismic missiles struck with pinpoint accuracy, breaching the subterranean defenses and leaving no doubt about the fate of those within. "Direct hit," Grant confirmed, his tone devoid of triumph. "The high command is neutralized." Peterson allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The architects of Echo 12's destruction were no more, their arrogance extinguished along with their lives. But the Admiral knew this was not the end. Humanity's fury demanded complete and total annihilation, and Altair Prime would be no exception. Prepare for the final phase, Peterson said. We leave nothing behind. As the Terran forces consolidated their hold on the planet, a transmission came through. The voice of King Varios, ruler of the Yeltrax, filled the bridge. His tone, once dripping with condescension, now carried a trembling note of desperation. Humans, Varios began, you have made your point. Our fleets are broken, our cities destroyed. What more do you want? Surrender is yours. Spare my people, and we will serve you. Peterson's expression remained unmoved. The memory of Echo 12, the screams, the flames, the cries for help that never came, played in his mind like a haunting refrain. Varios's words were hollow, a pathetic attempt to salvage what little remained of his empire. There was a time for surrender, Varios, Peterson replied, his voice cold and steady. That time ended when you erased an entire colony to prove a point. This is madness, Varios shouted, his desperation giving way to anger. You condemn an entire species to extinction. You become the monsters you claim to despise. Peterson's gaze hardened. We became monsters the moment you provoked us. Now! We finish what you started. With a nod from the Admiral, the comms officer cut the transmission. Peterson turned to Grant. Proceed. The fleet's bombardment resumed, targeting the planet's core infrastructure. Power grids failed. Communication networks went dark, and the once bustling cities were reduced to silent wastelands. Terran forces systematically dismantled every trace of the Yeltrax empire, ensuring that no remnants would rise to challenge humanity again. On the surface, Holt's squad reached the royal palace, a sprawling complex of gleaming towers and intricate gardens now marred by the scars of war. They breached the gates with explosive charges, their movements swift and deliberate. Inside, they found King Varios, his golden robe stained with soot, his crown askew. He stood alone in the grand hall, his once commanding presence reduced to a shadow of its former self. Do it then, Varios spat, his voice laced with defiance. End it. Holder raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. But Peterson's voice came through the comms, stopping him. Bring him in alive, Peterson ordered. Let the galaxy see the face of defeat. Holder nodded, lowering his weapon. He stepped forward, seizing Varios by the arm. The king didn't resist, his strength sapped by the weight of his failure. As they marched him out of the palace, the sky above was ablaze with the light of humanity's final strikes. The extinction of the Yeltrax was complete. Their fleets destroyed, their leaders captured or killed, their homeworld reduced to ruins. Humanity's message was clear. Those who provoked them would face utter annihilation. As Peterson stood on the bridge, watching the final moments of Altair Prime, he felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a grim sense of closure. The Yeltrax had pushed humanity too far, and this was the cost of their arrogance. Admiral, Grant said, breaking the silence. The operation is complete. Orders. Peterson's gaze remained fixed on the dying planet. We regroup, we rebuild, and we ensure the galaxy never forgets what happens when you provoke humanity. The fleet turned, leaving behind the smoldering remains of the Yeltrax homeworld. The stars stretched before them, a vast expanse filled with both potential and peril. Peterson knew humanity's path would not be easy, but they had proven one thing beyond doubt. They were a force to be reckoned with, and for those who dared to challenge them, extinction would always be the price.